Good afternoon, everyone. It's 1:52, and we're going to start exactly on time. Thank you for joining us. I know you had about an hour for lunch, so hopefully you're all very full and happy, but maybe also a bit tired. So what we're going to do just before the introductions and the heavy talking and all that stuff, we're going to show you a funny or die video. That's hopefully is going to be funny and going to also kind of set the stage to what we're going to be talking about today.
We should cancel these channels we never watch.
You can't cancel channels.
We only watch like 5 channels. Why can't we just get those channels?
Cable doesn't work like that. With cable, it's all or nothing.
Hi, can I get a single scoop contrary lean, please?
Yes, sir.
There you go. Do I have to eat all of this?
Yeah, that's how I scream.
That's me. That's $657. No, I was only parked here for 2 hours, so. Yeah, $657. Your sign says $3 park. Yeah, it's $3 for each space. And technically, you walk the whole lot. So that's 204 spaces times $3 plus $15 for each of the 3 handicap spaces. Those are premium. I only wanted one space. Parking doesn't work like that, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, open up the gate. Gate's broke. Can you fix it? You gotta call the guy. Don't worry, he'll be here between noon and 6 p.m. I don't like your way.
Okay, so that's our lives in many ways still, but SVOD services, OTT services are taking over, and we're going to be talking about that. Is it just a bubble, or is it a real business for OTT today in terms of SVOD businesses? So my name is Ido Shai. I'm with Kaltura. We're an OVP, online video platform company. We provide companies like HBO, like Disney, like Vodafone, with the tools to manage their OTT services. We do everything from the tools to use advertising as a business model, but also subscription, transactional, as well as complete kind of end-to-end service with linear channels, cloud DVR, catch-up TV, and all that. And I do product marketing at Kaltura, and I will moderate this panel today. And I'm going to let the other members of the panel introduce themselves. But I'm also going to ask you, when you tell us what you do and who you work for, to also tell us which SVOD services you subscribe to. And I will go first, of course. I have Netflix and HBO Now, but I'm also, I have to say, a heavy iTunes user. So I watch all the Americans, I pay for it, and some other shows as well. So that's my story.
Okay. My name is Bharat Krish. I run a company called Tac Digital. It's a very new company because I recently started it. Previously was with HBO. The premise of the company is to help other companies, big media companies or cable companies, to help in their streaming media strategy, providing solution, integration, and also user experience.
Channels?
Oh, channels, that's right. I watch HBO, of course, HBO Now and HBO Go, Netflix, and I have Amazon Prime. I haven't seen much in Amazon Prime because I just haven't had the time to do it, but I would like to.
Okay. My name is Titus Bicknell. I'm the Chief Digital Officer at RLJ Entertainment. And we as a company have traditionally done licensing into the United States, mainly from the UK. for physical broadcast and obviously more recently digital. And I joined the company to basically expand our digital footprint and to launch OTT services. So we run 3 SVOD channels: Acorn TV, Urban Movie Channel, or UMC, and a channel called Acacia TV. So I am a customer of Netflix, HBO Now, Acorn TV, Amazon Prime, and a service called Willow. You may have noticed I'm not from around here, and they don't show a lot of cricket in this country.
Nice. Colin Carrier, the Chief Strategy Officer for Twitch. A lot of people don't know what Twitch is. It's a live streaming platform wholly focused on video games, watching people play video games. We have over 100 million users. We were bought by Amazon about a year or so ago. And for me, I get to look at all fun new projects. I've started a music platform inside of Twitch, a poker channel, some other content verticals to try stuff outside of gaming as well. So I have a fun job. In terms of SVOD services, I'm trying to think which ones I don't use because my wife is in entertainment, and so we have cable and all the channels there. We obviously have an Amazon Prime account, HBO, iTunes, a number of stuff on Apple TV as well. I don't have a Fire Stick, which sounds bad. Maybe I do. Haven't used it. But yeah, I use them all. Try them all when I know what's going on.
Hi, I'm William Mao. I work for MP and Silva. We're one of the largest media brokers in the sports rights space globally. So primarily focused on helping leagues, clubs, federations, whoever has the rights to major sporting events in competitions with primarily their international distribution strategy. So in places where they don't have the boots on the ground to necessarily go directly into the market, talk to broadcasters and other distribution channels in a given territory. Our company is in about 20 different offices, speak 40 multiple languages, and are able to have those local market relationships that are able to then leverage across the entire portfolio of media assets that we represent. My job specifically is to focus on primarily the non-linear side of the business, so trying to find ways to further monetize the media assets that we have, whether it's through digital video, over-the-top services, video platforms, social media, and also news and clip syndication businesses as well. In terms of the services that I use, I think every year I actually take a look through my credit card statement or my bank account to see what are all the recurring payments, and most of the ones that the other guys have mentioned I subscribe to. I think the monthly bill I have is $40 or $50 total. So that'll give you a sense of the consumption rate, I guess.
Great. So I want to start with the question that we all gathered here for in order to try to answer, and these 4 gentlemen are going to do their best to answer it right now for you guys. Is there an SVOD bubble? Because if I look at the 5 of us, it seems like between us we use about 4.2 maybe SVOD services. So is that enough? And we also need to take into account that we're heavy users in a sense. We're in the business. We need to know what's going on. So maybe the average person out there is actually only have 2 or maybe only 1. So is there a bubble? Barat.
And there is and there isn't. When I was at I want to give some context. When I was at NBC Universal, one of the things I worked on was NBCOlympics.com for Beijing. And at that time we did, first time we did streams of individual games. One of the things we noticed was hundreds of thousands of people were watching curling, archery. Previously they weren't able to watch that. So now we just created a niche audience for a company that was traditionally just showing swimming, or basketball for the mainstream American audience, but now they are distributing curling and archery, and there are audiences sitting in the US to watch that. So when I think about that, I don't think there's a bubble. There's actually more to do in SVOD service. What I would say is what we need is quality OTT channels. If somebody's interested in dance, they would love to subscribe to a dance OTT service, and if it's a quality channel, it could be successful, right? So that's my thought.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah.
I'd agree with that. I think the concept of bubble, when we think about it, whether it's housing or tech,
Yeah.
usually, at least in my opinion, usually implies some level of overvaluation, overinvestment, investment before a market has been demonstrated. And so exactly to your point, I think if there are going to be, in every industry, winners and losers, and if there are quality SVOD and OTT offerings, those will be successful regardless of how many of the players are going to be in the marketplace. I think it becomes a bubble if too many of them are dogs versus not.
Right.
And there's too much dollars being poured into companies before they demonstrate their scale or their reach or their audience is actually there.
Titus, you actually manage an SVOD service. You can, you witnessed the growth of an SVOD service, also some of the challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like 10, 20, 50 companies out there can do what Acorn TV has done? And do you feel that Acorn TV now has a sustainable business model?
So I definitely agree with the notion of niche audiences. Acorn TV started in 2011 essentially as an exploitation of what we're all familiar with as a long-tail economic model. We bring licenses into the United States, and the first windows for those licenses are a broadcast window, DVD and Blu-ray, which still actually remain quite a viable and important revenue stream. And so the notion then of what you did in digital was, is there a little bit more you can eke out of this property, this value? But a large part of the challenge with a long tail model is if the platform cost and the technology involved in getting to your audience is complex and fractured as a market, you end up having to spend a lot of money. So if you want to be on Roku and Fire TV and Apple TV, as well as the web and as well as tablets, both iOS and Android, you end up spending an awful lot of money to be in all of those places to hopefully aggregate little pockets of audience on all of those platforms and hope that your aggregate is something meaningful. So that's the big question. And I think what's fascinating between 2011 and now, Acorn TV has grown. So at the end of 2012, there were essentially no noticeable customers. I mean, that's the sad story of getting into this space, is you can run for a year and get almost nothing for it. I joined the company in 2014, by which stage they had reached about 30,000 customers. That number was essentially because we had a paper-based catalog that was being dropped into American homes of people we knew were already purchasers of DVD content. And we said to these people, we can give you access to some of the content we know you like sooner because of the windowing strategies if you sign up for this SVOD service. But the real trick was getting beyond that core existing audience into a large mainstream audience. And the question there was, is there a large enough demand in the United States for ostensibly British television to make that niche into something meaningful? So 2014, 35,000 subs. At 12/31/2015, so 3 months ago, we were at 190. As of the end of the first quarter of 2016, we were at 250. So the scale of rate of increase is really interesting and rapid once you've got past that initial slow phase. And I think that the trick there, and I apologize for kind of monopolizing this part of the question, is the point at which you as a business stop thinking about it as a long tail and start thinking about it as what I would call a long body. You're not relying on one particular window to give you the lion's share of your revenue. You're recognizing the potential of all of those windows with the same value opportunity.
Okay, great. And Colin, Twitch is a is a different business. It's not a traditional type of content that we've seen with services like Acorn TV or obviously Netflix and others. How do you look at the SVOD business? What does it really mean for Twitch in the long run? How much do you actually care about the bottom line? Because you have so much going on. You're also owned by Amazon. So
Well, yeah, I was going to say, was that an Amazon doing right there? So yeah, it's the overarching question of SVOD as a bubble, sort of in the lens of what it matters for Twitch. We are sort of the ultimate niche. No one thought gaming was big, but sort of the three things, sports, music, and gaming are the only thing that really make a lot of sense for live. I think we're at a position where the big players in the space aren't running out of cash anytime soon, and so they're going to win out in terms of consolidation. I think users hate having so many different options, but the flip of that is these niche experiences and communities are getting created around different products that sort of have a chance of breaking through just the competition for pure content and extending to something else. So Twitch, if you saw the slide or the webpage, is an interactive experience. It's as much about interacting with that broadcaster as it is about the content. And our top content, for instance, we'll do 25 million live views for one of the top esports championships in the world, which rivals a lot of the sports top events. So it's interesting, and I think the bubble question. I think some of those pure play, sort of just content delivery services or form factors, if you're an OTT provider, something like that, I think they're going to struggle if your only angle is consolidation and creating a good experience inside of just hoping your content sells. I think for everyone else who's doing some niche stuff, you do have an opportunity to cultivate a community and do something different. And I'm sure there's a bunch of VR sessions going on here, but VR, I saw a HoloLens demo a couple of weeks ago, and it sort of blew my mind in terms of what the content experience can be, even watching a football game or something like that, where the experience is totally changed and would be another and new business model. I'm sure we'll talk about some of that with business models to make it sustainable. And so I think we are not in a bubble yet. There's so many options. Some of these are going to fall off, but we're not going anywhere.
So let's talk a little bit about content before we move on to talk about business models. I mean, there are three different types of content owners here, I would say. Premium content, traditionally like high-end TV production, user-generated content, and sports. Do you feel that some content is more precipitative, or the consumers of this content are more inclined to subscribe to SVOD services? And maybe you can also talk about the difference between live content and recorded content, and how does that fit into the SVOD equation? So maybe we can start with you, William.
Sure. My experience has primarily been in sports, and as Colin said, it is one of those types of content that lends itself very well to live streaming, and also sort of an individual priced service. I think even if you think back to when there wasn't all of this digital and over-the-top type offerings, and you were just looking at cable television, even then sports or certain types of sports were already being offered as individual a la carte offerings, right? You have pay-per-view boxing, WrestleMania, and a couple other events like that. Rugby for a long time in the US was only individual subscription based or Game Pass based. And so in that regard, it's kind of just carried over to the digital side, where these niche offerings built around rugby or cricket with Willow, or even just individual networks launching like a WWE, just kind of further that point. And as it relates to recorded versus live, sports is one of those situations where the time life of content is the shortest, right? You're very unlikely to DVR last night's baseball game, because it's just you'll see scores, you'll see recaps, you'll see news editorials written about it, way more so, not completely agnostic to it on the entertainment side, because you see these days people saying, on social media, don't tell me what happened, on Game of Thrones last night. I want to watch it. But when it comes to sports, you're very less likely to have those kinds of situations. So the value of live versus, let's say, VOD and catch-up, there's a bigger chasm between the price points.
What about Twitch? I mean, do you user-generated content? Is that, again, a sustainable business model? Can you actually make money off a subscription service that gives you access to other people playing Doom?
Yeah, so sort of harking back to what I just said, for us, the platform play is actually more important than a standard subscription to content. So in the past, we've done some paywalls on content, sort of as instructed by a content owner, thinking that they wanted their content to be behind a pay-per-view wall. And that's pretty much fallen by the wayside now. We almost don't offer that whatsoever. So all of our content is free and open. For the most part, it's all ad-supported. However, one of the fastest growing parts of our business is paying subscriptions or ways that users can pay to incentivize broadcasters or somehow elevate their status in the community. So you can subscribe to an individual channel. It sort of feels like you're donating to them to some degree, but it also gets you status in the channel. And so when you're interacting with that community, your name looks different in the chat. You can use special emoticons, and so we do things that probably can't happen if it were only a VOD service, because it doesn't have that, that same time tune-in viewing and interacting with other people. So the beauty of it is, for us, a broadcaster can go live and they could even be bad at, playing the game that they are, but they've fostered and created a live community around them that's, half the experience of just watching the content. So I think we're certainly in a unique position, but that really lends itself to being live. And I think even Netflix announced some sort of appointment tune-in viewing with your friends recently as well, sort of trying to do the same thing. So I think there's something to be said for live definitely being a different aspect of content viewing. SVOD, if you want to go buy a whole package of shows so you can watch it all at once, I mean, that makes a ton of sense, and I don't see that going away. If you've invested in creating really compelling content like you have with the Game of Thrones, you should and could be willing to put that behind a paywall and sell it. And I think that model sticks for the top end content, but for things like user generated content, for the most part, it doesn't. And so we have to find different ways to monetize.
Great. So it took us about 22 minutes to mention the name Game of Thrones.
Sorry.
Which obviously, no, it's okay. I think I thought it would come earlier, but this is still good. So let's talk a little bit about HBO now. And HBO kind of completely changed the industry in a way of the way that premium content holders look at SVOD services when they decided to be essentially one of the first to take their premium content and offer it as a standalone service. And Bharat, you were at HBO at the time. So can you give us some insight on the thought process there and about a year after how they look at this experiment?
Sure. So I work for HBO Latin America, so I was heading the digital needs for HBO Latin America. I can give you a Latin America perspective. So in Latin America, there is still a lot of linear subscribers space to actually gain. And at the same time, there are also operators and providers that provide broadband-only service and internet-only service. So last year we targeted going and getting those subscribers on board. So we launched our second version of HBO Go in Colombia. So one of the things we noticed was and we just launched the new series of Game of Thrones. There's a huge, of course, the internet community wants to watch Game of Thrones, whether hook or crook, right? So they find it some way or the other. Because of our market constraints, we haven't gone direct to subscriber yet in Latin America. But we would like to do something, HBO would like to do something that's like an HBO Now in Latin America as well. But from what I noticed, in the U.S. market, HBO Now is a big success, and the people watching Game of Thrones on HBO Now and Game of Thrones on the linear service are around the same. They have the same demand for it, which is during the premiere, everybody wants to find out what's going on with the first show, and they're also catching up on everything that happened before. So they watched the whole 5 series before, and when we look at the statistics, and leading up to the premiere, everybody is watching the previous shows, and the whole week before that was, we could see people are hooked on Game of Thrones. It's not just during the premiere. So there are lots of monetization opportunities that I can think of, and like Colin mentioned, it's selling individual Game of Thrones episode, could be a market in itself. So because the series is so popular that there's a cult following behind it.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about the price point of SVOD and kind of your thoughts on it. So we mentioned HBO, very high there on the on this table, and Acorn TV is offered for $4.99. Can you tell us a little bit, Titus, about how you decided to price the service, and if there are other people here that actually operate their own SVOD services, maybe give them some best practices on how to find the right price point?
Well, I will say, I was trying to put together in this slide prices for content that is fictional or non-fictional. I consciously excluded live and sports because I think they price in a different way based on the immediacy. So I wanted to make sure it was an apples to apples comparison.
Wait, where would you put WWE?
It's not a sport.
It's not a sport.
But my point on that is, I think it's very clear that if you have content that you're originating in the way that HBO does, and it's very clear from your relationship to the traditional MVPD model that you have this kind of value in the market, $14.99 makes perfect sense. I mean, as we all know, ESPN is off the top of this chart, and they know why they can charge significantly more than $14.99. But if you're then into the potential comparison model, almost everybody who's in the top half of that chart has some consumer offering via an MVPD already. So they understand what that monetized traditional cable model looks like. The challenge for us as a new player was, well, people are familiar with our content in the generalist sense because PBS offers a certain amount of British content, and PBS is a public access channel. You don't even necessarily have to have cable to have PBS. So there's no price comparison for us of premium pricing that we could leverage. And in fact, when we launched the service, we launched it at $2.99 because we believed in 2011 that the concept for your audience was still so strange that you would want to pay monthly to get access to stuff that I can get on PBS. And that wasn't entirely true, but that was the statement that people were making to themselves and we were trying to counter. It wasn't until 2013 that we raised the price to $4.99, and the rationale there was that PBS started putting less of their content, less British content, into their programming schedule, which meant that our offering was more differentiated.
And did you see a drop at that point?
We saw a short-term churn, which very quickly returned with other new customers, and in some cases, customers coming back because they were like, oh, this is more expensive than I was expecting it to be, but actually there's nowhere else I can get this. And I think the real secret to our pricing model and the scale of growth that we now have is that there is less and less British content available to an American audience through other channels, in the broadest sense of the word channels. Now, I think this chart shows, and we've seen what happened with Netflix and Amazon both upping their prices over the last 2 or 3 years, that there's always an outcry, and there will always be a disconnect, and that disconnect will settle over time, and people's expectations of what these services should cost and do cost very rapidly resets. And I think from that perspective, you can probably see that the average price on this chart is about $8.50. And I think that probably indicates that somewhere between $7.99 and $9.99 is feasible, depending on your content offering. unless you're in the HBO position of having such an incredible slate of content to offer.
So let's talk a little bit about advertising, because many SVOD services do not monetize with ads. There's the notion that if you pay, you shouldn't be forced to watch ads. But is that really, again, a sustainable business model looking forward, or do we actually need that ad revenue in order to support all these SVOD services that are around and are going to materialize in the future? William, maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I think one price point that actually isn't there is Hulu's other price point, right? To answer your specific question, for slightly, I think it was $7.99 still. You get the honor of not only paying that $7.99 but still watching ads, right? And so the offering there is really maybe based on the fact that you have more unlimited access still to the archival episodes of a serial series. And it's less about the ads-free nature of their service. My background prior to MP4 was at YouTube for about 3 years, and I left right around the time that YouTube Red was being internally discussed and developed. And so I grew up in a business that was entirely ads-driven and was only starting to explore the paywall type options and models. And now obviously blowing it out as a full-fledged offering. I think platforms like YouTube and platforms like Twitch have demonstrated that you can build a business without that paywall model as your cornerstone. But these, on the other end of the spectrum, you have ones that were entirely SVOD focused from the start. So I think it's just a matter of you understanding your viewer base, your customer base, and what their willingness to pay is if you do kind of move forward with a paywall service, and whether you want to actually have that hybrid model so that you're not entirely dependent on one revenue source. I think the whole concept of launching OTT and digital services for a lot of traditional broadcasters is to have another line of business, because at the end of the day, that probably helps your multiple in terms of valuation on some level. So I would think the same between an AVOD and an SVOD offering, and even a pay-per-view offering. It's one, defraying risk, and also kind of generating a quote-unquote new line of business that you can measure.
Right. Colin, what's Twitch's perspective on ads? Obviously, you have the scale to make a lot of money off ads.
Yeah, ads is a huge part of our business. Their biggest revenue stream by far. It's something that we're deeply invested in, at least for the long term now. However, almost my personal consumption conflict of thinking and hoping ads isn't going to be the primary mainstay because I hate them, and then going from watching TV to online where there's much less ads in terms of the SVOD services that I use. I think at Twitch we try to solve problems through innovation, not to just force things down people's throats, because that's the way it's been done. So I think we've had conversations internally in terms of how to innovate to solve the advertising problem, and whether that's changing how ads are delivered. I don't think the opportunity for ads is going to go away on Twitch anytime soon or ever, but I think the form that they take hopefully will. So it's a different type of experience that's hopefully better for advertisers, more engaging for users, and an overall better experience generally. So today, ads is supremely important. We share that ad revenue like YouTube does with their partners, with our top partners, and people are making a living off of this. So we need that, but I hope and expect that we'll be innovating in the ad space to cater to both worlds, because they do make sense. There's just been a lack of innovation thus far, so that's our position on it.
Titus, did you ever think that maybe you will lower the price to $1.99 and show like a pre-roll and a mid-roll and get, 10 times the customer base?
So the challenge in our space is that the AVOD right is different from the SVOD right. And so for a lot of our content, we don't have the rights to run ads on it. That's the main reason why our model is set as it is. we run a channel called Acacia TV, as I said at the outset, where we do have AVOD rights. And so we're experimenting on that platform with actually a short form version of it in partnership with Spark People, which is all AVOD. And so what we're interested to see is whether the advertising appetite exists for certain content types. So that's one part of the analysis. And then the other is essentially looking at how we buy rights and deciding whether or not in the future we might go back and either try and get AVOD rights or see them as having enough of a potential to make that hybrid model work.
I want to talk a little bit about device fragmentation. And Titus, you talked about it a little bit, that there's so many devices out there, and as an SVOD operator, you really need to leverage as many devices as possible. But obviously with that comes a lot of technology challenges. Maybe I'll start with you, and you can tell us, how do you view the market today in terms of devices? Maybe give us some insight to what are the devices that are the most popular for you guys.
Mm-hmm. So the key piece for us is, in the first phase of our strategy, was trying to be in as many places as we could be. But I think that very quickly leads to a misassumption that the business can make about technology as an acquisition strategy. That is to say, the business says, oh, Apple TV is a huge platform, we should be on Apple TV, which unfortunately doesn't necessarily lead to new subscribers. You super serve your existing subscriber base because they're now able to use your service on a device that they would prefer to, but it doesn't necessarily lead to an increase in your audience share or your audience visibility. What we found, therefore, is that in terms of deciding where to spend investment money on building for a new platform, the key piece to it is whether or not that platform has an in-app purchase opportunity, because that does actually facilitate customer acquisition. So, to give you an example of that, we launched with Roku very early on before in-app purchase was possible. And Roku became a very important partner for us, partly because they believed in what our service was offering. It was not replicated in any other space. And so they were interested in a lot of, as it were, in-kind marketing on platform. But because we ran a catalog, we could actually sell Roku boxes to end consumers bundled with our service. So there was a way of creating a market on a particular device platform. And that's a very unusual opportunity. It's not something we can even replicate at this point, and no other SVOD services would necessarily be able to do that very easily. So what it meant was that there was kind of a flat line of Roku as the preferred box of choice. It was one of the few places you could get it on a big screen compared to watching it on your laptop. But you had to go to your laptop to sign up. That was the mechanism. About 18 months ago, they created the API systems to allow us to do in-app purchase. Sorry.
Someone from Roku is calling to thank you for the kind words.
And they said to us very clearly, we believe that this is going to lead to customer increase because the barrier to entry of downloading the app and then signing up for it is so low. And so we earmarked development money to do that integration. It was incredibly difficult because if you can imagine the scenario, you have to check whether this customer is already your customer. You have to check whether or not this customer is still paying you, sorry, the microphone's playing up, still paying you month to month and therefore control their access on each and every device that they have access to. You have to decide at what point you know that they've stopped paying Roku. And so you shut off their access in various places. So it's a very complicated piece of engineering, but it has absolutely been worth the investment because we've seen an enormous lift in the number of, so we're looking at a conversion rate, people who download the app and then actually become customers. And that conversion rate has increased dramatically on a platform where we're now able to offer in-app purchase because it's essentially a one-click experience. The other anecdote I'll give you is everybody understands that when you're on Apple and you make an in-app purchase on Apple, the percentage that Apple takes is 30%. There's probably not a single consumer on the planet who is not aware of that because it is so blanket, it's so understood, it's so expected. And what we noticed was that as our competitive set launched on iOS or tvOS with in-app purchase, they would actually explicitly say to their customers, you know there's an Apple tax. You know how much it is. And so we've added that tax to our monthly rate And so if you buy it through Apple, it'll cost you more, but we don't make any more money than we would if you came to us directly. So there is this notion that premium access, ease of access, the fact that you want to have it on your iTunes bill rather than come to our website, put in your credit card details, and be our customer directly as well, is a very clear value to customers. And they understand that, and we make it very clear, even though we're not allowed to make it as clear as one might expect, that if you are an existing customer, which means you've come to our website and you've paid there, you can use our iOS offering, you can use our tvOS offering. But people are still choosing to sign up, even though it's premium priced, because of the ease of that facility of in-app purchasing.
Great, and I want to talk a little bit about going global, because I think we're in New York. It seems like the whole world is just North America, but obviously for SVOD services, the global opportunity is actually huge. And we've seen at Kaltura, one of our customers, Viacom, is actually now taking their content global in a way that they couldn't have done prior to the OTT age that we're all living in. So, Bharat, I know that you had a lot of experience, especially in Latin America. Talk to us a little bit about the most interesting markets that you can think of for SVOD services that are based in the US or elsewhere.
From a global perspective?
From a global perspective, from a growth perspective.
Right. Just going back to the device thing, just to touch upon that, and it makes sense to global needs as well. One of the things we saw in Latin America was more people were using Android phones compared to iPhones. So the ratio is completely tilted. And so we were focusing on Android deployment more than Apple or iOS deployment. And what we realized from there was a lot of the Android owners also had Chromecast. So we were focusing on Chromecast. So what I'm saying is that part of it is listening to the consumer and see what they want, what device they are requesting, and going, if you're deploying to the next device, first check what the customer is asking for, right, and then go to it instead of going to the most shiny device there is in the future. So from a global perspective,
but that actually also ties to global perspective, because in Latin America, for example, I think Android is like 98% or something.
Yeah, it's
crazy like that.
It is crazy, and we also have a lot of device differences. So the same Samsung Galaxy here, over there, has a lower screen resolution because it's at a lower price point. So even though it might work here in the US for the same resolution, it may not work in Latin America. So from a technical point of view, there are lots of difficulties as well. There are lots of difficulties. So from an SVOD service, I mean, there are many things going on in Latin America, I'm sure in Asia as well. A lot of the difficulties are related to languages. Serving in multiple languages, content needs to be dubbed, subtitled, and also multiple currencies. So, and credit cards are not that common. In some cities they are, but in other cities they are not. So you have to offer vouchers instead of, or prepaid credit cards instead of expecting somebody to swipe a card. So also free is very popular, of course, everywhere, but you can get a lot of audience through free, but there needs to be a lot of effort put into converting them to paid. And what we noticed in Latin America, it's extra hard to convert them to paid, and that includes marketing, social media, newsletters, so all of that goes hand in hand with that. So US is actually relatively an easy market for paid subscription compared to the global market, just because of the language, the demographic, the currencies, the lack of credit cards, so all of that.
But if Titus is thinking
Beyond
about
just
expanding
the content
to
itself,
but if Titus is thinking about expanding to one country in Latin America in 2016, which one should he go after?
I would say Colombia would be your test market. So the reason why I say it is Colombia is a growing, there are lots of growing metropolitan locations there, plus broadband has a higher penetration in Colombia compared to cable. So you have a lot of audience that have internet already and high-speed internet. So I would say test that market first. Keep.
William, you worked in Europe for a while, and many of the sports events that you have rights to are obviously very popular globally. What are the more interesting markets that you're seeing?
Well, I think our business is very much about finding the untapped markets for a league or a federation. So we don't add any value to, let's say, an NFL in trying to get in and find a slice of get in on the negotiation of their domestic deal with CBS or Fox. The value we add is being able to help them in a market where they aren't directly going into that market trying to find distribution. And so that is the model we use for any property. So whether it's bringing a European football league and its content to Asia, or taking something from Asia and trying to port it into Latin America, those are our key goals. And so when we think about market opportunities, it really depends on the content itself. We don't just use like a blanket model for all sports. We look at relative popularity of that content in different regions, the appetite and the current programming that we are already helping to distribute in that market. Because one thing we haven't really talked about here that is just sort of endemic to all the offerings we saw on that list is there's an element of they've cobbled together a set of content that is related to each other in some way. Whether it's British content, whether it's niche sports, whether it's, in the case of Netflix, it first started out as like the long catalog of movie titles, and then they got into TV shows, and now they're doing original programming, right? So in our case, it's also looking at how you bundle things together that makes sense for a given market. So while we do have sort of expertise in understanding which markets in each region are clamoring for sports content, we still look at each piece of content or each property individually, understanding its own key value proposition and how it fits with the other content that might be already available in that marketplace on a given distribution channel.
Okay, great. I wanted to open it up to questions, so feel free to ask the panel. Yeah.
Questions for Twitch. Is the Twitch model similar to the Machinima model in the sense that it's social gaming but multi-channel, or?
We're more like YouTube than an MCN. So we are the platform. We actually don't have any. There's MCNs on Twitch, but they have their own channels. We don't allow the MCN model because, as you can see, it's pretty broken. But no, we sort of are YouTube plus the MCN because we do all the deals directly with the content providers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I guess this is for anyone doing SVOD. I mean, how do you think about churn in the SVOD world? I know when in Dish, when people have asked questions in the chat or call for the Sling TV, they say, "Oh, we're not really concerned about churn because the customer acquisition costs are much lower, so it's not as much of an issue." Just curious what your thoughts are.
And there's actually this report that came out that shows the amount of churn for some of the leading OTT services out there. You can see that there's a lot under other, which I suspect they're kind of the lower tier OTT services. So who do you want to talk about that? Titus, do you want to address it?
So I think when it's not an investor call, everybody will acknowledge that churn is a risk. We don't like to talk about it because it's not talking about the success of your brand. I think the key factors in churn are, in the most general sense, if you have a niche offering where you have a very clear target audience, where you're not trying to be all things to all people, your churn will be lower. So Netflix functions because, or at least historically it's functioned by saying, we believe that we can acquire at least 50% of our audience afresh each year and a delta that gives us growth. So we're not so worried about churn. We also know that a certain number of people you can remarket to and they will come back. I think what you're seeing in their content strategy, and this is certainly borne out by our experience of it, is that if you start focusing on viewership in certain key segments and you start providing more content that is relevant and curated to the audience patterns that you see in terms of viewership, people are less likely to churn. As soon as you've got a situation, and I guess the anecdote that I wanted to throw out there is in the old physical world, we would talk about walking into Blockbuster, walking around it for 30 minutes and walking out with a video we'd already seen, or a DVD, VHS we'd already seen, because the choice didn't help us discover new content. The belief was always discovery of content is going to be because there are 30,000 film titles on shelves and therefore you'll find something new. It's not how we behave. So similarly, the anecdote has been updated to say I browsed Netflix for 90 minutes and then I went to bed. What we've seen, and I think I'm relieved to see that Netflix and Amazon and the big players are beginning to do this too, they're recognizing that that's not a very successful model for your customer. It's much better if you've put something carefully thought through and curated in front of them, seen how they respond to it, and then offer them more of the same. Because then the chances are, and this is what we see with the Acorn TV audience, is if you can see that somebody's really engaged with the show, they've watched every single episode of Midsummer Murders, which, trust me, takes you a long time to watch that many episodes. If you find 2 or 3 other series that have a similar makeup in terms of, is it a leafy British village? Do you have a nice sort of gentle murder going on? I mean, it's a sort of funny concept, but you I'm sure know what I mean. Exactly, it's. I mean, the other tagline we use for it is it's toffs killing toffs. It's a very genteel way of killing people. If you can fit that audience with enough shows that follow that pattern, they're going to stick around and believe that they can just tune into something they've not necessarily seen before and trust you as a content curator to know what they want. And that actually is the best strategy to avoid churn.
Well, I think there are 2 other elements of churn. One is a lot of these services, at least when they first launched, and YouTube was a case as well with its original pay-per-view service or subscription services. There's a trial period. It's like you sign up, and first it could be the first 30 days is free, or you get 1 month free, or you can cancel at any time. You can cancel in the first quarter without any sort of repercussion. And so that's going to obviously cause some natural churn. You know that some of the people who are signing up every month are going to be those people that came for specifically a tentpole event and maybe are not going to stick around for and be a long-term customer for you. A second one would be what we were just talking about with Netflix, upping its price in the last month from I think $7.99 to $9.99. I'm sure some very smart people at that company surmise that the amount of additional churn that will result in increasing that price was going to be more than offset by the number of people who were lazy customers who would just migrate over from that $7.99 to $9.99 and still have enough additional new customers to make it, like you said, a delta of a massive net positive. So those are 2 more sort of underlying elements of churn, and those elements are very similar to what we see in other industries. So I don't want, at least in my mind, it's not massively novel, the pricing model or lack thereof, when you look at all those services that we saw in their different price points. It's oftentimes looking at what's the other guy doing and making sure it ends in 99, right? Like those things have been around for a long, long time. And even in the banking industry, for example, you have the idea of acquiring a customer with a high interest rate and then slowly weaning them down to a low interest rate on their checking or savings account. That's just the reverse concept of what Netflix is doing and what promotional pricing strategy is in the SVOD. It brings someone in early, get them hooked on the content, get them ingrained and accustomed to having that service as part of their daily life, and then if you slowly ratchet up the price, there's going to be some natural churn, but there's going to be a lot of people that are just going to stick around, and that's the long-term value of customer acquisition.
Any other questions? Yeah.
You experimented with more dynamic pricing models? Because like the way you're describing it, $9.99, $12.99, it's very old school that you can buy a toaster for $9.99. But we have on
I've personally seen some leagues doing not necessarily dynamic, but multi-point pricing models within the same season of the same offering, right? So they'll bundle things in multiple different ways and have to have overlapping content and price them differently and see what the willingness to pay of the marketplace is. Or pricing, the example I often go to is both Major League Baseball and NBA, especially NBA now, you have the ability to buy, it used to just be buy season pass, right? And you kind of get everything, kind of that ice cream model. And then it's like, oh, if you only like chocolate flavors, we're going to give you the chocolate package. So you still have to buy 5 different flavors. It was better than buying all 31 from Baskin Robbins. It's like, and now they have the ability, hey, you can buy a different flavor every day for a different price point than the massive season pass. But they have all those available now, and now they're going to get to see like which one has the most uptake. Was the pricing relatively right relative to each other? And then every season is the test and learn as they continue to iterate. And yeah, maybe ultimately there's going to be a dynamic model, but the tricky part is you have to advertise a certain price, and then if someone else is seeing someone else is getting a different price, then you have that whole consumer protection issue and false advertising issue to deal with.
A surge in pricing. Yeah.
A question to Bharat. Considering the difficulties in Latin America of the subscription model penetration, what do you think could be a good advice to kind of work around that issue in Latin America and start selling subscription model?
Where are you from, if I?
Yeah,
Argentina. I mean, one of the issues in Argentina is a lot of premium content doesn't make it on time in Argentina, and because of that 6 months gap, there's a lot of piracy, right? So, I mean, I would, if I had to advise big media companies with content, would be, take, I mean, it could be a Game of Thrones only OTT service that you can package and sell it to for a lesser price, but during the season Game of Thrones, a lot of subscribers are going to log in and watch it, So, I mean, I would say if another strategy would be just target. If I have to be very specific, just Android phones. Have a mobile-only subscription based channel for Android devices only. I mean, there are millions of subscribers that are Android only, and there are also other operators that are actually willing to take that service and package that along with their service, mobile service. So you could build a SVOD service that could be packaged along with the Spotify, along with other things, and then you could have a palette of services that they can sell to their 8 million subscribers that have Android phones. So there are many different ways to do it. I mean, we can even talk after if you feel like. Okay.
Like maybe one last question.
If you're considering this bubble and business concept, each of you mentioned about free services you use. Do you know, is the expansion of the bubble concerned at a household level by the money they spend per month or by the number of services they have per month? In other words, how many they use. Like, I don't watch all my cable channels. Right. No idea.
Well, I definitely think financial is, at least for me, is at least something I mentioned at the outset, I keep an eye on. But at the same time, am I paying to have for the optionality, or am I paying for the actual consumption? I would say that in a number of the cases of the services that I subscribe to, the price point is so that I can have the option. I mean, even when you were talking about Blockbuster Video, the first thing I thought of was, holy crap, like, I remember it used to cost like $5 to rent a VHS tape and put it in my VHS and I have to return it within a week. If you think about that type of pricing relative to the cost of some of these services now, you're getting a steal today versus before. So for me, oftentimes it's not about the volume of content, It's about the optionality of being able to access certain things whenever I want. That's my personal opinion.
Wow, that's a tough one.
Any other thoughts?
I'll give you one thought from our side. I do not believe that people are looking at their existing cable bill and saying, oh, I can get the 3 or 4 things that I watch most of the time as a la carte add-ons, and so I'll drop my cable subscription. I think what people are paying for is, as it were, the cost of choosing to opt into something rather than being under contract to something.
So how many choices does a household need? I mean, when do they stop adding more? Is it dollar driven or?
I don't think it is dollar driven, partly because one thing that's very consistent about the SVOD platform space is, although we offer annual contracts in the same way that most cable operators force you to be at least under contract for a year, if not 2, we don't sell very many of them. People don't take advantage of what's usually a fairly sizable discount if they buy in for a year. They will pay the premium every single month so that they know that they could cancel at any point. So what they're paying for is that sense of, I'm going to opt in for something which I believe I'm going to use now, but I may not use next month. And I appreciate and value that option to back out. And then most of the time they don't. So it's a little bit risky as a business strategy because you're relying on an inertia of an audience. And we've all referenced the fact that that's actually very much in our favor. But more often than not, it is not somebody who's saying, if I spend $6.99 or $8.99 on this thing, I have to find an $8.99 saving somewhere else in my personal budget. And because it's so easy to opt in and to do free trials, I think there are an awful lot of customers out there who are trying 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8 services as they come along, keeping 2, finding there was something more in it that they expected. But if you actually sat them down and said, do you realize, as William did, how much you spend a month on these items cumulatively, they would have no idea. And if you told them, they would be shocked. And then they'd start cutting back.
It would still be less than $240 for cable subscription.
Agree, but in most cases, those people are already paying that and will continue to. So it's additional to that.
If there started to be some more data on switching between those services, which you probably, I don't think there's that much research on it yet, unless there is I would love someone to direct me towards it. But that will give you an indication of like what's the willingness, the size of the bundle that someone's the number of bundles they're willing to buy. Because right now I think it's more like a question of how many credit cards do you have in your wallet. It's kind of that question to me. And I would love to see if you start seeing commercials from like an Amazon or Netflix or these other services that are kind of more like some of the political attack ads that you see in the current cycle around. Hey, come to us instead and switch over, as opposed to saying sign up for us. I think we're still in the sign up for my service kind of marketing and promotional structure right now because, like you said, we don't know. Like there could just be tons of new customers out there. You just have to go make them aware of your service, as opposed to saying, oh, you know what, they already cornered the market, so we need to take share from them, as opposed to saying the pie can grow. I think that's the core question here about a bubble or not.
Great. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you very much to the panelists, and have a great rest of your conference.